Welcome to Crash Landing. My name's Steve, and every episode I'm going to be guiding an intrepid explorer as they crash land on an alien planet. They have 1 hour to choose the 5 books they couldn't live without on their brave new world.
Warning, ship crash landing. You have 60 minutes to enter the archives and recover significant cultural artifacts. Authorization required. Identify yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Barry Nugent. Obviously I've got my author hat on today, but I am also the one of the co-founders of the Geek Syndicate website and podcast and blah, 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 blah. With my author hat, I have, it's a good one actually, I have written several books. Some of which
Tell us about your books, Barry.
Yeah, some of the ones I don't know how much I want to say. I suppose the first book they've all been actually no, the first book wasn't self-published. It was published by a company called Doham Books, which was called Paladin, which was way back in the day, which was a kind of action adventure kind of probably think more Romance in the Stone, that kind of vibe, rather than straight up Indiana Jones. And the stories that I'm probably most known for amongst my gang are Unseen Shadows trilogy, of which I've only done 2 books, which are Fallen Heroes and Forgotten Warriors, which are a mix of different genres, but primarily it's that kind of pulp vibe. And I think with pulp kind of crosses different genres anyway. But I suppose these days the closest way to describe them, I guess, would be urban fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And of course, you've got lots of spin-off comics from those 2 novels as well.
Yes, I think at last count, we had, I want to say 13 one-shots and 2 graphic novels.
Excellent stuff. So,
and an audio drama.
Yes, there's that too as well.
And a choose your own adventure book.
Thank you for joining me on Crash Landing. As you know, I'm going to crash land you on an alien planet. But before we get to that, you're allowed to take 5 books. So, tell me what your first book is and why you've chosen it. Okay,
I should do this with a preface that the books that I've chosen, by and large, I haven't reread these books in years.
Yeah.
So, But there's reasons why I've chosen this book.
Yes.
So my first book is Quest for Lost Heroes, which is written by, I know, one of my favourite authors, if not my favourite author, and certainly I know he's a favourite of yours, Steve, which is David Gemmell.
Yes. So what can you remember about this book?
See, I've got the blurb in front of me. I'm not going to read it. I don't want to be that guy who just sits there reading blurbs out.
Yeah.
But I'm using that as a guide. But I suppose how I came across this was that originally the first book I'd ever got, someone had lent it to me at work, which was Waylander. That was probably the first David Gemmell book I'd been given. I read about 3 chapters and thought, this isn't for me, and kind of just put it down. And then many years later, I stumbled across Quest for the Lost Heroes in the library. I think I just took it out because I liked the blurb on the back. And was absolutely enthralled by it. It's kind of like, imagine you've got the Alamo, bear with me, and you've got some of the big names from the Alamo. Now, imagine they've survived the Alamo, and it's kind of like decades later, and they kind of have to be called back into action again. And that's kind of a really bad summary of it, but that was kind of the sense that I got from it, because it was kind of, it was just the concept of, everyone likes this idea of like these of aging heroes, and being brought back into the sort of fray, as it were. And it was what I remember about it as well, it was a real kind of hero's journey, because they were effectively following this young guy who's, I'm not sure what his relationship to her was, but she'd been sort of kidnapped by slavers. It was like a young girl. And he kind of recruits these guys to kind of go after this girl.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it was he was almost like Luke Skywalker. He didn't really know anything. And as he kind of went on this journey with these kind of old masters, where he kind of learns more about himself, about them, and God, the cat's kicking off now.
He's excited about the book.
And it was brilliant. And I think one of the things, and I will read this out because I did do a cut and paste. It had this section in there that I absolutely loved, and it sort of stuck with me. It's probably and it is the favourite bit of prose I've probably read in any book for me. and it's something that Charos is telling Kyle,
Yeah.
I think his name. And he says, a warrior has only one true friend, himself. So he feeds his body well, he trains it, works on it. Where he lacks skill, he practices. Where he lacks knowledge, he studies. But above all, he must believe. He must believe in the strength of will, of purpose, of heart and soul. Do not speak badly of yourself, but the warrior that is inside you hears your words and is lessened by them. You are strong and you are brave. There is an ability of spirit within you. Let it grow. You will do well enough. When I read that, I knew that no matter how this book ended, I was going to seek out every single book that this guy had written. You know, I just knew it. And basically that kind of that sort of started my love affair really with David Gemmell and his books, and to this day really there hasn't been any for me any book that's kind of touched his stuff in terms of kind of just creating heroes and heroines that you want to emulate, that you want to be like.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of something that we've lost a little bit with this sort of grim, dark fiction. I think, you know, everyone's grey, everything's bleak, and even though his books kind of had that tinge to them, his heroes were certainly, you know, they weren't perfect, they were flawed, but they were heroes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, Trust the Legend. I mean, come on, you know. And I think the next book I read after that actually was Legend, which again, just phenomenal.
Because this is like the fourth book technically in the kind of saga, or the fourth one that was published. And it's interesting that you tried Waylander and didn't like it the first time, and then have read this, and then have gone back to Legend and the others.
And weirdly, and when I went back to Waylander, I sailed through it. Absolutely sailed through it. And I think it was an old friend of mine at the time had said to me once I'd read that one, he said, if you love that, you've got to read is it King Beyond the Gate?
Yes. Yeah.
With Tanaka Khan and stuff like that, which may well have been, I kind of read the Drenai books out of order.
Yeah.
Which I think was another good thing about them, was even though there was an order to them, it didn't necessarily matter that much.
No, didn't.
And that was something he was really good at doing, that even a lot of his books, which were sequels, didn't really feel like sequels, because sometimes they were like 20 years apart. Yeah, so that's my first pick.
Okay. Because, I've read a lot. I think I read all of them, to be honest, all of the David Gemmell books over the years. The only ones I hadn't read were the crime books that he wrote before he was published with Legend, that you couldn't get a hold of for love nor money because they were published under a pseudonym. Ross Harding, do you remember this?
No, I read. Didn't they release? I don't know. That was a kind of. I don't know if that was a new manuscript they found or whatever. Which was it Rhyming Rings?
Yeah. So that's his. So that was the one that was never published and never came out. And the other one is White Knight, Black Swan, and they've republished both in the last year or two. Gollancz has republished them under his name. So these are kind of crime thrillers. So actually, in my hand, I'm holding a copy of White Knight, Black Swan. So I've now got a new, old David Gemmell book to read, but people have said, don't expect, it's not fantasy, it's crime, but goes back to his days of when he's a reporter, but you'll feel some of the kind of familiar characters, and you can see where some of the people came from that were inspired, and these were based on people that he met, including all of the characters that we've talked about in the Drenai books.
Now, did you, so this is your first sort of David Gemmell outside of fantasy read, then? You've not read Rhyming Rings?
No, I've not read it.
Yeah, see, Sue bought me Rhyming Rings for my birthday last year.
Yeah.
And I read it, and I went through a phase of really loving crime fiction, and I sort of went off it anyway. So I hadn't read any crime fiction in a long old time. I really enjoyed it. And it's weird, I think what people have said to you is right. Even though it's not fantasy, it's got that Gemmell-esque vibe to it.
Yeah.
You can certainly see certain characters have a sort of drossness to them or whatever, and it was good. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't know that other one was out, so I'll be looking to pick that one up as well.
Yeah, it's out in paperback too. So those were the kind of the two hidden things that have been reprinted, which is great news. Okay, yeah, we could talk about David Gemmell all day, but we won't. So tell us what your second book is and why you chose this one.
Okay, second book is strangely linked to the first.
Oh, yeah, it's weird that. Go on.
Yeah, weird that. So my second choice is Dawn Thief by James Barclay. And basically, Dawn Thief is centered around a mercenary group called the Raven, which are 6 men and an elf. And it's set in the sort of fictional land of Balia. And what I loved about the Raven is it's basically a fantasy version of the A-Team. And the way the book, actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. The way I came across this book was Sue had found this in the bookshop, and she'd actually rang me. And because they were selling it, I think they were doing a promotion where they were selling it for £1.
Right.
And she sort of read the blurb off the back to me over the phone, and I was kind of like a bit dismissive, and I was like, nah, another fancy book. I'm not really that interested. And then she read, it was like a cover quote or something, and I can't remember exactly what the cover quote said. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then she said, oh, I think you need to know who said the cover quote. And I was like, well, who is it then? And she said, David Gemmell. I went, buy it.
That's it.
Buy it. And I got it, read it, loved it. Again, read all the Raven books. I can't remember. James, if you're listening, apologies. I can't remember how many Raven books there were, but I read them all. And one of the things that I loved about the first book was you've read the Raven stuff, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. There's either 5 or 6 books, I want to say.
Yeah,
Sorry, James.
It's something like that.
No, I think he did a trilogy, and then another trilogy is what I think he did. I think.
Yes, yeah. One of the things I loved about this book was the level of world building that he did in that first book. Given the fact, without the book becoming this almighty tome that you got to wade through, and still make it a fast, action-packed story, I thought was genius. Because I think sometimes that can be the difficulty with a lot of fantasy stuff. Is it's really easy to get bogged down into the world-building aspects of it, and if you don't handle it right, it can really slow your story down. And I really felt that, certainly with that first book, that James kind of nailed it. And he made some really, I can't say anything, I'm being really careful how I talk about these books because I don't want to spoil them for people, because I genuinely want people to go and read them. So something happened quite early on in Dawn Thief that kind of, I had my drawers on the floor because I couldn't believe what had happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I think I remember, yeah, but I'm trying. Yeah, I don't want to say it as well. It's quite a shocker. Let's just say it's quite a shocker for a first book in a trilogy. It's not what you think would happen. Yes.
But then the way it's dealt with and the way it moves the story forward, I thought was really good, and it has repercussions kind of throughout the series. And I just loved it. I think the bond between the characters is great. The stakes. Given the fact it's kind of 6 books, and like you said, I think you're right. I think it is sort of 2 trilogies, but they are sort of linked.
Yeah.
But he manages to up the stakes every book, and the stakes were pretty high in the first book. Because the whole point of, again, if memory serves, I think Dawn Thief was actually a spell, but it was some ridiculously complicated spell, and they need to do certain things to perform the spell. And again, you know, the odds are against them and the stakes as high as they can get. That's book 1. By the time you get to like book 6, you're like, seriously, how much more can the odds be stacked against these guys? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How high can the stakes be? But you have such a confidence in the Raven. And again, going back to Quest for Lost Heroes, what I like about the Raven is there's like quite an early scene where they kind of ride into a place, and you can almost feel people stopping what they're doing to look, to sort of go, it's the Raven. Yeah, it's the Raven, you know. Phenomenal. I absolutely love Dawn Thief. So that's my second pick.
What I've always liked about James Barclay's books and David Gemmell, as you say, is that none of it. I don't think any of them have a book that goes over 600 pages. Maybe that's probably like the upper limit, if anybody even hits that limit. And they pack a lot of world building in, a lot of character, and a great story. And a long-running series can be very rewarding and it can be brilliant. But I've kind of reached the point where if a book is 800 pages and then someone says, yeah, it's book 1 of a 12-part series, and you go, well, how many are out? Well, 1. And I think, I don't think I can do it anymore. It's just that thing of... And I read one book and I got 400 pages in and I had to put it down, and then someone turned and said, yeah, but you're not giving it a chance because it's a 10-part series and you're only a little bit away into the first book. I thought, hang on, if you haven't gripped me in 400 pages in the first book of a 10-book series, something is wrong, dude. You need to you can't just constantly pace it out over the 10 books. And they never did this, whether it was a lot of Gemmel's books were one and done. They were connected, but they were one and done. And even James Barclay's books, these trilogies, there's a lot going in on each book. It's not 400 pages of world building and walking and then 200 pages of fighting and then the same the next book. It's like something is going on. And I think I've taken part of that into my own work from both of them. I sort of say, right, pack it in, get the story going, make the pace fast, put it all in and go, and don't stand around looking at the trees for 20 pages describing the leaves.
And I think that style of it, that works for, at the end of the day, it's a personal choice, and it works for some people. And I know I'm probably going to get stoned, but I know part of the reason why it took me so many years to get through Fellowship of the Ring. Yep. I'm sorry, but it took me so long was because of that. Was because every 5 pages it felt like they were stopping for a song or to make camp or whatever. And that's just me. My style of reading is I like things that move, that the pace is going. And when you're doing the world building is happening whilst the story is moving forward. I just feel with some books, it almost feels like it just stops and a narrator walks on to sort of literally pull down a chalkboard and then sort of start drawing maps out and explaining to you how the world works or how magic works and stuff. And with sort of Gemmell and with James's stuff, I just feel like that happens, but it's happening whilst people are moving. It's happening whilst the story is moving. It's constantly moving.
Yeah. The world building is informed by the story. It's not just a case of that they're padding stuff out. And you're like, well, can we not just get on with the story? So, yeah, I agree. I just prefer. It's just my own personal preference as well. I like something that moves, and I don't want to spend too long just kind of studying the background and things.
Yeah.
But okay, right. Let's move on to your third choice. Now, I've not actually read this one, so I'm curious to hear about why you've chosen it.
So I've just realised, because what I've done is I've been getting sort of little synopsises and things, and I realised I'd completely missed this one out. So I'm having to do. So this is Artemis Fowl.
Yes. And
Artemis Fowl is it's the first book in 8 books.
Right.
Written by Elwyn Cofer, which feature the criminal mastermind Artemis Fowl II, who is I'm trying to remember in the first book how old he is. If he's either 11 or 12. 12. I'm looking at it now. One of the things I loved about this book was the way it starts. Is you get the first passage is it's like a foreword, but it's almost like from the point of view of a therapist. Okay. Talking about Artemis. So Artemis is introduced. It's almost like it's basically like from Case Files. So it kind of sets the scene of like who Artemis is, how clever he is. So yeah, imagine a Bond villain who is 12 years old.
Right.
That's effectively Artemis Fowl. It's no word of a lie, Steve. That is Artemis Fowl. He's a Bond villain, but he's 12, and he comes from this sort of criminal empire. His dad is sort of criminal mastermind, Artemis Fowl first. But I think his dad's disappeared, sort of believed dead, and it's and his mum she's, even though it's not really said in the book explicitly, she's kind of had a nervous breakdown. That's kind of the vibe I get.
Yeah.
And because of that, it kind of allows him to sort of do things with more free reign, shall we say, because she's not really about. And he has his own personal bodyguard who's called Butler.
Okay.
And yeah, it's just. So do you remember there was a Batman cartoon. It was called Beware the Batman. It was like a CG cartoon.
Yeah. And
it had Alfred in it, but Alfred was kind of like this big bald-headed dude with a bowler hat. That's kind of how I imagine Butler to be. And the first book, which is the one I've picked, is kind of like a cross between, like I said, like a James Bond film and Home Alone and Die Hard.
Right.
And the whole plot of this is basically Artemis is what he's discovered, that alongside like humanity, there is like a whole world of fairies. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get leprechauns and stuff like that. And he's trying to get their pot of gold.
Right. Okay.
And to say any more would give it away. But it's brilliant. It is brilliant because this kid has got all these bases covered. And I actually read it again the other day, and it holds up. I've read all the books. I read all 8 of them, and they're all fantastic. But for me, this first one, I still think is my favourite because it just wasn't what I was expecting.
Right. Okay.
I cannot recommend this one enough, and I think it was kind of sad because it was kind of out, or it was kind of doing the rounds around the same time as Harry Potter.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously everyone raves about Harry Potter and all the rest of it. And I don't like to sort of compare books, but I'm going to. But for me, I much preferred the Artemis Fowl books, even though I loved Harry Potter.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because it's a really brave thing to do. You effectively taken a kid and you turned him into a villain, and you're setting your book series around him, and you've made him a character who, like, he isn't necessarily a likable character.
Right.
Certainly in the first book, I mean, there is some character development as the books go on, but he isn't necessarily a likable character. But he's competent, and he's like your best Bond villain in that his plan is genius. So you end up, despite yourself, kind of rooting for him. And again, going back to the world building, so there's this whole concept of like the leprechauns and stuff, and it's a massive world, and basically the main sort of character that represents that side of things is Holly Short. And she's a fairy and captain of the LEP Recon, which is the Lower Elements Police Recon.
Right.
And the great thing about them is they've got all this future tech. So even though they've got magic, it's magic combined with like all this like high tech equipment and stuff. And yeah, as I said, it's brilliant. It's really well written. It's funny. It's got some nice emotional beats in there, especially when you kind of realise some of the reasons why Artemis is doing what he's doing. The ending's really good. It's a nice quick read as well. Again, how Irwin manages to get the amount of world. I mean, this book is shorter than the other 2 books.
Yeah.
And he packs in just as much world building in some cases, if not more, and does it. And this is it's a book aimed at this is like middle grade fiction.
Right. So how dark does it get then? If he's a villain, how dark does it actually get?
It doesn't. It's dark, but not in that kind of. It's not like he's killing people left, right, and centre or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's not dark like that, but it's pretty clear that he's the villain. It's pretty clear that he's the bad guy. But as I said, you can't help rooting for him because he's like the cleverest guy in the room. Do you know what I mean? And every time you and as the books go on, every time you sort of think, how's he going to get out of this? He's already like 3-4 steps ahead of him. And it's worth sticking with the books to see how he develops and how his relationship with Holly develops, and the other characters and stuff. And it's a fantastic book and a fantastic book series.
So as he gets older as well in every book as well, you're seeing him grow up like the Potter kind of thing as well.
Yeah, it's a similar thing. But they've but you haven't got that kind of, that chosen one trope.
Destiny, chosen one.
No, it's just, he's just a Bond villain. It's just a young Joey. It's like the stories of a young Bond villain growing up, and maybe kind of learning that he doesn't have to be quite that Bond villain. It's that sort of thing. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the book.
It's a brave move to have a main character as someone who's potentially unlikable and can be even more unlikable depending on the reader. So that's definitely a brave thing, and also for young readers too. Yeah,
and I would have. I mean, I loved it reading it as an adult. I would have killed to have read this. Like 11, 12 or whatever. And this is now being adapted as a film. Which is, I think the trailer came out about a month ago. It's due out it's due out this year. And I'm interested. It's been mixed. The reaction to the trailer has been mixed. I quite liked it. I quite like the look of it, but I can understand what people are kind of saying is the trailer kind of gives off a bit of a Spy Kids vibe.
Right.
Which I think is what they're saying is kind of doing a disservice to the way the book is. And I can kind of see where people are coming from, but I'm willing to give it a chance. I need to see more before I make that sort of judgment call. It's literally a teaser trailer. The kid doesn't say a word. So, for me, it will be when he opens his mouth, that's when I'll be, that's Artemis Fowl, or you've done a crap job, Disney.
Well, it's one of these things that they want it to do well, and if it does really well, it's another franchise sort of run for 7, 8 years, or 7 or 8 books, and the next 12, 14 years or whatever it is, as the actors grow, they'll race to try and make them as fast as they can.
Yeah, exactly. If they can nail it, I mean, they're going to be laughing. We'll have to see.
The next Daniel Radcliffe will be loaded for life. So
yeah.
Anyway, okay, let's move on to your fourth one. So I'm familiar with this book and the author, but tell the listeners what it is and why you've chosen it.
Yes, I too are familiar with this book. However, I when I say I haven't read this book in, I don't even know how long, I can get about as far as the title, and I'm struggling. So this is Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, which for people in the cheap seats is the kind of, I don't know if it was kind of endorsed by George Lucas back in the day, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah, it included in the whole kind of wider Star Wars world. The
expanded universe before Disney swept in and turned it into Legends.
Yeah.
So this book it's obviously the first book of a trilogy, which is called the Thrawn trilogy, is set 5 years after the destruction of Death Star, and it kind of picks up with basically what happened after Return of the Jedi, which is from Princess Leia's point of view, trying to establish a new sort of government, a new sort of Senate, and from Luke's perspective is trying to sort of figure out what he needs to do with the Jedis and stuff like that. That's about as much as I kind of remembered about it. So yeah, so basically, sort of one of the main big bads in there was a guy called Thrawn, who was part of the Empire, but he was kind of, I think he was away, like on the Outer Rim or something like that, when the whole Death Star thing went down. And he kind of comes back into it. And the great thing about him is that he was this sort of master tactician, and it was almost the way I look at it was almost like what it would be like if Lex Luthor worked for the Empire.
Yeah, okay.
And again, sort of going back to almost like the Artemis Fowl thing, he was a guy, he was just 4 steps ahead of everyone. And you get a sense that had he been on the second Death Star wouldn't have got blown up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was a fantastic character, because one of the things I quite liked about it was, I remember when they introduced him in it, and he didn't particularly like the Emperor or Darth Vader.
Right.
And he didn't really like their methods, because he was kind of like, you spent all this time training up Imperial officers and stuff, and then like Darth Vader just sweeps in and kills them when they fuck up. And
not good use of resources, really, is it?
I think he literally says something like, "This is what a poor use of resources." It is literally stuff like that. And and I remember reading it and thinking, he's got a point. Because literally, I mean, old Darth was going through him in Empire. Do you know what I mean? You make a little mistake, and he was like, "Apology accepted, Captain Needa." Do you know what I mean? It was just and this guy was basically just saying that's the wrong way to do it. So he had his whole long-term strategy, which he sort of played out over the course of the trilogy. And then I think, if memory serves, there was a Jedi in there that was sort of slowly corrupting Luke, and then it obviously all comes to a head in the third book. And I think there's like a brilliant climactic sort of X-Wing battle as well in the third book. So I said, I remember the trilogy like in fragments, but the reason I picked it was because I'm one of those old fogies like yourself that can remember a time when all we had was the 3 Star Wars films.
Yep. And
there were no Star Wars films coming. So when they brought out Heir to the Empire, it was, for me, it was like a man in the middle of the desert, like discovering an oasis. Do you know what I mean? And the fact that they were kind of even hinting that this was kind of semi-official, like canon of how Lucas might have envisioned the story going on, I was all over it. And I absolutely loved that trilogy. And I would say, as much as I don't want to turn this into a kind of, rip on the new trilogy stuff. Overall, I enjoyed Force Awakens and I enjoyed Last Jedi. Both of them I have issues with.
Yep.
However, I would still kill to see these books made the kind of official, this is what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
Because mainly I think because it focused on the characters that I grew up with. Han, Leia, Luke, Chewie, Wedge. These were the characters whose stories I wanted to see continue.
Yeah.
And obviously, because it took them such a long time to get around to doing the films, that's obviously changed now, and we're looking at new characters and stuff. But for me, that trilogy of books still kind of sits in my head as like my continuation of what happened after Return of the Jedi.
Because this would also be hard for some of our listeners to believe, but before the internet, some people who are still alive, actually, you remember that, like us, if you wanted expanded universe stuff, this was the only way you could get it. They hadn't even really done comics to the degree that we later got from Dark Horse and other people for years, sort of 10 years, 12 years of expanded universe stuff and all sorts of things. And they said, yep, it's canon. And then, of course, they announced the new trilogy and the prequels and all the rest of it. But until then, this is how you got more stories. And this is how it expanded it. So this first book, it said it came out in 1991, 92. So I'm trying to think when Jedi was 80... 89 maybe, or something like that, or 87? No.
Yeah, I think it was
earlier than that, wasn't it?
It was earlier than that, wasn't it? I think it was mid-80s.
83, there you go.
Okay.
So this is, so this book is still like almost 10 years after that, but it probably took them that long to get permission.
Yeah. But but also it needed to be that good, because it was a good. Again, I haven't read the trilogy in donkey's years. I don't know how well it would stand up to a reread. But for me, I remember just being engrossed in those books at the time. And everyone that I knew, like Dave was reading them as well, In fact, Dave may have lent me that one, I don't know. But I think if those books hadn't have been as good as they were at the time and successful, I don't think we would have got that expanded universe, because there were other books that they did around that time. I think there was one which I read which was called Splinter in the Mind's Eye, which was set between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah,
I could be mistaken. And I think there were some X-Men books, but it just never really grabbed me. But I think this one, it grabbed me because it really did feel like straight up continuation, and it really felt like it was answering the questions that I I wanted answering. What would happen to the galaxy? It wasn't just about the characters as well. It was like, what would happen to the galaxy? And I quite like the idea of, when we see the end of Return of the Jedi and everyone's like clapping and the Ewoks are singing and all the rest of it, that you think it's all done. We've blown up the Death Star, we've killed the Emperor, we've won. And what I quite like with that first book, it was like, you've won a major battle and you've turned the tide of things, but it isn't, there's a lot of other stuff going on. It's not over yet.
Yeah, 12-year-old me was like, yay, brilliant, that's the end of it. 20-year-old me is going, okay, so you've destroyed their biggest weapon, but you haven't killed every single soldier, so what happened to the rest of them? And this is kind of it. It's like, and then what? So, yeah, it answers those questions of, well, okay, what happens to the rest of the stormtroopers, and what happens to all the other planets they've currently got under that are being held, and what happens to the Senate, and as you say, someone's on the Outer Rim, they come back, now what happens?
Yeah.
So yes, it filled in gaps and took the story forward beyond, long before we had any of the films and the expanded comics in a way that was satisfying by using the original characters as well as new characters.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and again, as I said, it was a great way to continue the story.
Yeah,
I felt, and there is that part of me that kind of wished that's what they'd done, and they just adapted those. But there we go. They did what they did, and that was all right.
Yeah. Okay. Right, which brings us on to your final book, and I know nothing about this book other than what I've read, and I just tell us what it is and why have you chosen this one?
This is a really difficult book to explain.
It's weird.
Yeah, so this book is also I think it actually started out life as an RPG.
Yeah.
And I think these books just kind of spun out of the RPG. And the RPG, or the sort of the world for it's called Torg. And the books, it was a trilogy. And I've picked the first book, obviously, which is called Storm Knights. But the trilogy is called the Possibility Wars. I'm not going to attempt to, I want to say Bill Slavinsek.
Well done.
It was worth a go. It was worth a go. And the idea of this book was basically it's an invasion. The trilogy is about an invasion, but it's not it's not an alien invasion. It's kind of like, it's basically different realities that are invading Earth, and it's these raiders, which are called High Lords, come from other realities, and they come to Earth to steal Earth's energy, which is in the form of this. They call it possibility energies.
Right.
But each of these High Lords, they basically come with their own reality. So I'm probably doing a really awful job of describing it. So there are. I'm trying to think now. I think there's 7 realities.
Okay.
And each one has its own lord. So basically, the steward of that reality. And when you move between the different realities, you have to abide by the kind of laws and mechanics of that reality. So, for example, one reality may be sort of more medieval based. So automatic weapons or modern tech, stuff like that won't work in it.
Right, okay.
Whereas there might be another reality where all of that stuff will work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'll give you a quick rundown of the realities. So you've got the core Earth, which is our Earth. Mm-hmm. You've got the living land. So if you think basically that's kind of primitive Lost World, Jurassic Park style land. You've got Isle, which is effectively Dungeons and Dragons reality.
Yep.
You've got the cyber papacy, which is kind of it's like cyberpunk meets medieval religion and all sorts. And that introduced the GodNet before the internet.
Okay.
You've got Nippon Tech, which is basically Japan, Yakuza, martial artists, hackers, that sort of stuff. And then you've got my personal fave, the New Null Empire, which is basically a pulp reality.
Ah.
So in that one, I'm going to go into that one a bit more because this is one of my things that attracted me to it. It's basically 1930s technology works side by side with Egyptian magic and weird science. So basically in that world, you would have your kind of Doc Savage type character, your Indiana Jones, your Shadow, that sort of thing. Whereas, say, Nippon Tech, you would have your Neo and your Morpheus and your Trinity. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I see, yeah.
And like your core, and you live in land, you'd have, not necessarily Conan, that's the wrong, I was trying to think what would be Lost World type thing. Maybe that's the wrong analogy. But basically, all these different realities each have their own lord, and they've all come to our Earth to take over our Earth. And what you have are these people on Earth who are known as Storm Knights, and what that means is that they can kind of cross between these different realities, and the laws of those realities don't apply to them.
Okay. So did you ever play the original role-playing thing it's based on, or did you just come across this book?
I came across the book, and apologies, I know I've done an awful job describing any of that. I came across the book. Dave lent me this book back when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And it absolutely blew my mind. Is it the most well-written book? Probably not, to be honest. I think back in the day when they used to do a lot of novels based on source books from RPGs, they were kind of just banged out a bit. But something about this grabbed me because it had that kind of, it was part invasion, part disaster, and just a mix of different realities. And it stuck with me so much so that, here's the link, when I was developing Fallen Heroes, and I decided this was going to be a kind of multi-genre book. I think a lot of the Storm Knights was in the back of my mind that it could, it could be done. Because if you read Fallen Heroes, effectively there's horror, there's pulp, there's high-tech stuff, there's crime, there's espionage, there's thriller. I pack a lot of genres into it.
Yeah.
But Storm Knights does it in such a way that it's so distinctive. And in many ways, it's still a very distinctive book for me, and a very important book for me. It really did set me on a bit of a path when I read it. And again, it's that thing of what I believe with books is it's about what a book does for you personally. Mm-hmm. And just because a book hasn't got the most great prose and a great plot and characters that, the most well-written characters ever, if it works for you, it works for you. That's very much how I see books. A book is a very personal experience, as it should be. No one reads books in the same way as anyone else. Everyone takes something different away from it. But yeah, I would recommend this book to people because it's such a funky idea and so many different concepts. And I remember reading it and having to kind of reread sections just to try and understand what the heck was going on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it definitely sounds like, as you say, this had quite an impact on you at a young age, an impressionable age, because I think at that age I was reading straight fantasy, and it was only people in one reality. To come across something like this where someone's taken something and merged lots of different realities into one, that must have kind of opened a few doors in your head, in your mind.
Yeah, because I think, like you, the books that I was reading then were very set. And by that I mean I would read a sci-fi book. Yeah,
you read SF1 and spaceships, and then a fancy one that's over here, and they don't come together, they don't mix.
Yes, because you didn't really. I mean, nowadays, obviously, everything comes under that umbrella of urban fantasy, But back certainly, you and I were of a similar age. You didn't really get a lot of stuff like Dresden Files and books like that.
No,
it was very kind of, you had fantasy and you had sci-fi.
Yep.
That was pretty much it. And obviously now it's exploded and you've got every genre is kind of covered really. But I think that book for me, when I read it, it just blew my mind because I hadn't read anything like it. Was someone was kind of literally daring to kind of do different genres in a book and in such a blatant way.
Yeah. It's just had a, as you say, it's obviously hit you at the right age, and it might not have been the best book in the world ever, but it's changed your view of what a fantasy book, for lack of better description, can be. That it can be all of these other things. So yeah, as you say, it's what the book means to you, not necessarily how other people in general rate it.
Which was kind of when you kind of asked me to come on and to pick books.
Yeah.
And obviously I've gone off and picked books that I haven't read in years. But I was very much picking them from the point of view of every one of those books affected me as a writer and as a reader, but primarily they affected me as a writer. And I know I wouldn't have written the stories in quite the same way had I have not read those books, which was why I picked those 5, And yes, some of them were incredibly well written. Others probably less so, Storm Knights. But that didn't matter.
Absolutely, yeah, as it should be. So, which brings us to the end. Now, unfortunately, you are now going to have to be crash landing on a planet with your 5 books to keep you occupied. But you do get to choose what kind of a planet you would like. So, tell me what you've chosen and why.
Right. So, the planet I've chosen is Hoth.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so why Hoth?
Well, anyone that kind of knows me knows that most of my holidays consists of me going somewhere cold with my wife.
True.
We got married in Iceland. So, so that's reason one. Also, I am pretty much scared of anything that crawls with more than 4 legs that isn't a cat, because I don't like dogs either. So going somewhere hot or jungle is out. It's just out because it's going to be creepy crawlies. And if it's going to be an alien planet, it's going to be giant creepy crawlies.
True.
So sod that.
Yeah.
So I picked Hoth from the basis that the only thing I'm really going to have to worry about is the Wampas. Which, to be fair, so long as I stay out of ice caves, I should be okay. And there's tom-toms. And the biggest reason I chose Hoth, to be honest, was Empire Strikes Back is still probably one of my top 5 films of all time. And growing up in sort of London and stuff, I didn't do any travelling really until maybe in the last 10 years. I hadn't really properly travelled.
Yeah. So
seeing Hoth was like nothing I'd ever seen before as a kid. And I saw, I think I would have been 14, 15 when sort of David and I went to see Empire. And I'd never even left London, let alone going somewhere where there was like that amount of snow and that vastness that you get when there's a scene where he's kind of riding his tom-tom, or it might be Han Solo's doing it, I don't know. You get this sense of this vastness, and it's just this whole planet of just snow and ice, and it just stuck with me. It's always stuck with me, even more so than Endor. And even though they're on Endor for longer in Return of the Jedi, Hoth it's just stuck with me. And maybe some of it was it had the cooler. I always wanted Han Solo's coat, even to this day, desperate to have Han Solo's coat
with the furry thing,
with the furry hood. And you'll see. I'll be wearing news. You see, every time it gets winter, you'll see I've got about 3 or 4 different coats, which are all big, all with the big furry hood, but none of them are as cool as Han Solo's coat was in Empire. Desperate for it. And then you add on to that snow speeders, awesome.
Yeah.
Tom-toms, awesome. Imperial walkers, obviously I don't really want Imperial walkers on the planet that I'm on, but awesome. That first shot of the walkers, you can't beat it.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So yeah, that's my pick is Hoth.
Okay then. I think that's fair enough. It's not some people have gone for very comfortable planets, so you've picked one that's quite tough, but it's for good reasons, and you've got some books to keep you company.
Yeah, I don't know how long I'm going to last for.
That's the thing. Yeah, how long you last is questionable, but at least you'll like it.
Yeah, and at least I'm not going to get killed by giant spiders and shit like
or anything. That. Yeah, none of that stuff. Okay, right. Well, thank you for telling us about your books, and thanks for coming on Crash Landing.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. And apologies, everyone, for my rambly descriptions.
It's all good. My thanks to Barry Nugent for joining me this month. For more information about his books and his comics, you can visit his website, which is unseenshadows.com, where you'll find information about the 2 novels Fallen Heroes and Forgotten Warriors, as well as links to comics and also the audio drama. If you'd like to support this podcast and all of the other podcasts on the Geek Syndicate network, then you could leave us an iTunes review, or you could also visit the website geeksyndicate.co.uk. So that's it for this episode, and I'll be back next month.